Today we're talking about causes of the 2008 real estate crash. And this is part two of a two-part series. I lived through that. I held a house through the real estate crash, so I saw exactly what it was like. This isn't a definitive history of what happened. It's just my thoughts, my opinions. I'm not an economist, but I did live and work through it. I saw the effects of it and saw the effects of it on the piece of real estate that I owned at the time. So, some of what we talked about in part one was there'd been a push by the federal government to to make mortgage loans that were today we call them subprime, but it was to make mortgage loans for borrowers that maybe didn't have documentable um, incomes. So say they worked maybe for cash and things like that, and it was hard to document their incomes. There was other ways to do this too. We would have called them at the time no doc loans, and then they also had kind of the term out there that was often used. Just they would call them liar loans because you could state whatever income that you wanted, and so people could lie about their income and get a loan for a house that maybe they couldn't afford. Now, when the push for these came out of Washington to the banks to make these kind of loans, I actually was a fan of it. I thought that was a good thing. I thought more Americans should own their own homes. And I still think that's true today. I think we should be an ownership society, that you should own your own home. But there are people that don't want to own their own homes, and so they do need places to rent. Uh, one of the other one of the causes that we touched on yesterday of the 2008 real estate crash was the belief that real estate always goes up, and nothing always goes up that I'm aware of anyway. It's always going to come down at some point. Nothing always goes up. And I saw that with the property that I bought. So in the summer of 2005, I bought. Now this is all leading up uh, to the run up in real estate prices. Real estate prices were actually going up at this time in 2005. Um, this is all before the crash. There was a big housing boom in the U.S. We were building a lot of houses at the time. Interest rates were pretty low. So in the summer of 2005, I bought a condo in North Carolina, and it wasn't expensive for me at the time. It was I would say it wasn't expensive. It was affordable for me, but it was valued at $68,000, a two bedroom, one and a half bath condo. It was affordable for me, so I bought it. Bought it luckily enough at the time. I bought it with a 15-year fixed rate mortgage. And I didn't know how good of a decision that was at the time. I knew the difference between fixed rate and adjustable rate mortgages at the time. And luckily, the people that I worked with at that time to buy that house, that's what they pushed me towards. They didn't push me towards adjustable rate mortgages, uh, which tells me they were good people and they knew what they were doing. They probably could have made more money if they'd have pushed me into an adjustable rate, but thank goodness they didn't. And also, I knew the difference, and I don't think I would have went for it anyway. I wasn't extremely educated on the subject, but I knew a little bit. But I bought that condo in 2005, and by the middle to late 2008, so let's fast forward 3 to 4 years later, that condo had went from being worth $68,000 to worth $30,000, more than a 50% decrease in value. And that was in the middle of the real estate crash. I was regularly seeing other condos in there selling for $30,000. Uh, we were definitely in the depths of it at that time, 2000, probably not 2008, but more like 2009, 10, 11 in there. And the value stayed at $30,000 for a long time. And only when I moved from North Carolina to Northern Kentucky, where I live today, did I get it? Did I get a new value on it? Uh, so I took out like a HELOC on it to be able to use some of the equity because by that point in 2018, it was actually paid off. The property was paid off. So I wanted to use some of that equity, so I got a HELOC. So I needed to get an appraisal. And when it was reappraised in 2018, it had just came back to its original value that I bought it at in 2005. So it was appraised at about $70,000. And then fast forward to today, it's valued at about $140,000 to $150,000. So from 2005 to 2000, just say 10, it dropped by more than half. From 2010 to 2018, it just came back to its original value in that period of time. So in those 8 years, and then 2018 to today, it's basically doubled in value. But you can see, obviously, real estate does not always go up. There are times when it goes down, and it went down in the first few years that I owned the property. So, but that was something that happened. People actually believed that real estate always goes up, and it proved to not be true. And just by looking at history, we should have known that. Also, something that's lesser known is what the banks were doing behind the scenes in the derivatives market. So the banks found another way, the big banks found another way to be able to make money off of what was going on in the lending market. So behind the scenes, they could be taking what's called derivatives. They're complicated financial instruments. I don't 100% know or understand them, but I've done enough research on them to be able to speak a little bit about them. But they could take bets on, I'm going to call it bets because that's basically what it was, on different batches of loans, whether they were going to be good or bad. And most of the time they were betting that they would be good. And they could highly leverage those derivatives. So they could, maybe with just 10% of the money, they could control 100%. So let's just say with $10,000, they could make a $100,000 bet on which way, if those loans were going to pay off or not. And this was a way for them to make additional money in a secondary market from these loans, from the loans that they had all already created. And that was fine as long as the loans were performing well. But when the loans started not performing well, that 10% that allows you to control 100% turns against you fast. It's just leverage. And when they started turning against the banks, they really increased their losses. And that's what pulled a lot of the big banks down at that time. Just examples like Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, they either went out of business or were bought by someone else. But they basically do not exist today. They're gone. There was also the subprime lender Countrywide. They went out of business at this time. They had just made a lot of risky loans, and those loans turned against them, and they took losses. And then also Washington Mutual. These were all multi-billion-dollar companies that ceased to exist during this time period. So from 2008 and 9 when all this was happening. I think the first one to go out was Lehman Brothers, and then later Bear Stearns, Countrywide, and Washington Mutual all ceased to exist. So these are also things that caused the housing crash at that time. Some of it was behind the scenes, like with what the banks were doing, but then some of it, making the risky loans in the first place, was out there, in daylight. I can remember having conversations with my coworkers because a lot of us were looking at houses at the time, and we were surprised with what we made with what the banks were willing to give us in loans. It didn't make sense to us. We didn't feel like we could afford those loans. And my income was you could easily document it. So I could imagine if you couldn't document someone's income, they could have easily gotten riskier loans. But none of us, like myself, I think I was approved for the time. Now let's go back. This is the middle of 2005, but I was approved for a house for $250,000, and it was just me. It was a single income household, and I did not. There was no way I should have been able to afford that, and I didn't buy that. Luckily, I knew enough at the time to not go buy a $250,000 house. Just looking at the payment, there was no way. It would have taken too much of my income to do that. But I was approved for that, which made no sense whatsoever. But my coworkers and I were all in disbelief that because the same thing was happening to them. They would go, they would apply for a mortgage, and they would get approved for $250,000, and it just did not make sense because they knew they couldn't afford that either. And luckily enough, most of us didn't do it. I think that's it. Yeah, I've covered the derivatives market, things like that. The derivatives market, I do know less about. I know that it existed. I know it was kind of behind the scenes. Most of us would have never known about that. But when everything else started to collapse, even a small amount, the derivatives market really collapsed because it was bigger than the real market because the banks had taken so many bets on the different loans. But then also because they'd used so much leverage in that market. And so when it turned against them very fast and brought their whole businesses down, which was catastrophic for them and for the U.S. Real estate market, but also the U.S. economy. And it actually pulled the majority of the world economy into a recession at that time because a lot of the same thing happened in other countries too. We don't always talk about it as much. It likely, as far as I know, it started here, but the rest of the world suffered from it too. So I always like to end these with a quote, and these right here, this one is one of my favorite quotes, and it is from the late rapper Nipsey Hussle, and he says, "You will never be criticized by someone doing more than you. You will only be criticized by someone who is doing less than you." So that's from the late rapper Nipsey Hussle. My name is Mike Williamson. I'm a real estate investor. That's what I usually talk about: real estate, the economy, personal finance, things like that. There'll be a Calendly link if you want to book 25 minutes with me. Talk about how to get you in real estate or whatever you want to talk about. Talk about how you can get your first rental property. That is free. There is no cost to that or anything. It's just something that I offer. Hope y'all have a good day.